I'd like to touch on some local politics if I could, please. If this bores you, I apologize, but sometimes I got to do local politics. And I don't mean Chicago politics, I mean extremely local. I live in a small town called Shanahan, Illinois, and the next town over is Manuka, Illinois. And the two towns essentially function as one, but they have separate governments. We share high schools, we share park districts. It's like one big town, but they really are two separate towns. Both towns have had objections recently to solar farm projects. More recently, the village of Manuka has voiced their opposition to a solar farm. Now, the county of Grundy, now, I live in Will County, and part of my town is in Grundy. A lot of Manuka, and I think part of is in Grundy, and I think part of it is in Will. But Grundy County is ultimately going to have the final say on this project. But Manuka has voiced their opposition to it. And I'm spotlighting this because to me, I'm not making any accusations. I'm just saying what I'm seeing seems sketchy, conflict of interest. How do we determine all of this? Let me show you what I'm talking about. Manuka Village Board opposes solar farm project. Following their last board meeting, Manuka Village Administrator Dan Duffy, remember that name, Dan Duffy, Village Administrator of Manuka, spoke to WCSJ about the solar farm discussion that took place. He said there are designated areas that make sense and some that do not, so they've created a solar designation map. Over the last probably 3 years, we're no different than a lot of municipalities and cities in Illinois. We've been dealing with solar farms getting close to our corporate boundaries where commercial, residential, and even industrial are starting to mix in. So the complaint is that the solar farms are getting too close to essentially towns, right? Certain areas make sense for solar. Give an example, we've actually created a solar designation map for the village and our outer planning perimeters where we think will grow and where we think makes sense for solar. There's a couple of areas on the east side of town where the railroad track comes through the village and add that really nobody wants to build single family home. It's not the best location for commercial and access, yada, 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 yada. So he's talking about where there are good places and there are bad places for solar. It makes total sense. When you go north of the village, we've got a large strip of commercial and residential north of Ridge Road, where we have now a few solar farms starting to come in that were annexed in a couple of years ago. At the time, we didn't feel those were the best locations, but the solar farms worked with us to carve out prime corners of Ridge Road so commercial can still go in there and they can just build on the backside. So essentially, what's happening here is we have a small town in Manuka. In Shanahan, we're about 14,000. I think they're like 12 or 13,000 in Manuka. But you have a small town that's growing out into the cornfields. And if we're going to be slapping solar up out into the cornfields, it makes sense to have a little bit of foresight and say, listen, how far out are our villages, our corporate, our industrial, even our residential going? How far out do we factor they're going to go into these rural farming areas? And do we really want solar there at that? Now, I don't have a problem with solar projects, but a lot of people around here do. A lot of people around our two towns want to tell farmers what they can and can't do with their properties, even though these farmers all across the state of Illinois have made a financial decision that it is more beneficial for them, economically speaking, to lease the land to a solar farm than it is to actually farm the land. And there's a need for and a desire for renewable energy that we don't have to rely on foreign sources or dirty sources to help provide. But for some reason out here, people are just dead set against it. All I've heard is good things about Dan Duffy. I'm not saying Dan Duffy is some kind of crooked guy by any stretch of the imagination, but he's part of the village that's saying, hey, we don't want the solar panels to get too close to the areas that we think the town is going to grow into. What about this one? Trajectory Energy Partners, Good Farm Solar. Good Farm Solar, a community at the forefront of energy adoption, chose Trajectory to develop its first community solar projects. You can see there, you see the farmhouse and the barn and the road and the solar farm there, right? The project is in Grundy County, same county that Manuka is in. It was energized in 2024. It's operated by Summit Ridge Energy, and its project type is called community solar. Now, why do I bring this one up? Well, because as you can see here on their website, it says the Grundy County community has played a historic role in being on the front edge of energy development. It was home to the Dresden Generation Station, the nation's first privately financed nuclear power plant that still serves Chicago and northern Illinois. Grundy County also houses large wind farms, natural gas peaker plants, a biodiesel producer, and an oil refinery. However, they had not yet tackled solar. In 2018, our team met a local landowner, Dan Duffy, a well respected farmer and local official. Trajectory, Dan and Grundy Economic Development Council and local carpenters worked together to successfully zone and develop the project. Good Farm Solar was constructed and energized by union labor in 2024, bringing the cost savings to local subscribers. Yes, that's the same Dan Duffy. I am happy to work alongside Trajectory, a responsible Illinois solar developer. They have been a great partner who stuck with us throughout the project and is making an impact not only on my local community but on my family. Dan Duffy, landowner. So here's my question. There's the small town that this farm is near, and then you see the red dot up at the top, Good Farm Solar. Is that far enough away? Who determined that? Is that going to encroach on the eventual growth of this town as it expands not only on one side of 55 but on the other? Once again, please understand, I'm not saying Dan Duffy's doing anything nefarious. As a matter of fact, like I said, I've only heard good things about the guy. It just seems a little conflict of interesty to me. And how did we determine that that piece of land that you own is close enough or far enough away from that particular town, and this one isn't? People own farmland. They have a couple of ways they can make money off of it. They can sell it and get the hell out from underneath it. They can farm it, or they can lease it to somebody else who's going to do something with it. They don't want to sell it. It's been in the family for generations, whatever the case may be. They don't want to farm it anymore because it's not profitable to farm anymore. So they're finding that they can lease their land to companies that want to produce green energy in our areas. You took advantage of it. You are making out with it on your land. Why can't somebody else have it on their land? Why was your land okay and this one is objected to? That's all.